Welcome to Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation. We believe in harnessing the power of singing to improve mental health and well-being for children and young people. I'm Celi Barberia.
And I'm Chapman. In this series, we've paired guests from different areas of research, practice and strategy to make connections and to understand more deeply the unique role of singing, songwriting, voice exploration and creative music making in transforming children and young people's mental health and well-being.
This second series focuses particularly on how we can inspire young voices, and especially on how children and young people who have particular challenges in their lives that can affect their mental health can be supported through singing and music making. Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation.
Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. It really will help us to get the word out. Thanks for listening, and now on with the show. We're sorry about the slightly fuzzy sound in some parts of this recording. Celi and I are really excited to welcome two great friends of Sing Up to the Inspiring Voices podcast. Dr. Daisy Fancourt is Professor of Psychobiology and Epidemiology and Head of the Social Biobehavioral Research Group at UCL, whose research focuses on the effects of social connections and behaviours on health, including social deficits, such as loneliness and social isolation, and social assets, including community engagement, arts and cultural activities, and social prescribing. Daisy has published over 250 peer-reviewed papers, 2 books, and over a dozen book chapters, and given over 40 keynotes around the world. She is listed by Clarivate as one of the world's most highly cited scientists, which I find mind-blowing and brilliant. How do we match that with a second guest? Here's how. Howard Goodall CBE is an Emmy, Brit and BAFTA award-winning composer of choral music, stage musicals, film and TV scores. He's also a distinguished music historian, writer and broadcaster, and has been Classical Brit Composer of the Year and Classic FM's Composer in Residence. At Sing Up, we know him best as the first and only national ambassador for singing, providing huge support to Sing Up when it was the government's national singing programme and campaign for primary schools from 2007 to 11. Phew! Howard and Daisy, welcome to both of you.
Hello.
Hello.
Now, I know that you're both happy for me to let our listeners know that you are in fact father and daughter. Given your phenomenal shared knowledge and experience of music, I'm fascinated to know, what do you talk about? Is it about deeper, meaningful stuff around music, or is it more mundane day-to-day things?
I mean, we had dinner last night and it was very much not about music. It was all mundane day-to-day.
I think it probably changes over the years because, when Daisy was at university in her musical phase, we talked quite a bit about music and when she was at school, she did a lot of music at school. And then, Daisy, since university, has veered much more into a scientific world, taking her musical great ability and background into it. And so many of the things that Daisy does and talks about it are things that are very different from my daily life as a composer. So it's more sort of questions and answers and trying to understand what she's up to than what do you think about Mahler's Fifth Symphony? On the other hand, she now has 2 fantastic children, and so we talk a lot about them. I like to bring the conversation back to them as much as I can.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the lovely things over the last few years, has been actually having a whole new context within which to talk about music with my daughters, and being able to rediscover the love of music again, which all children innately have, but just coming back into a sort of full circle of my own engagement with music with my dad.
People often ask me, Baz, whether, they've got to be musical or musicians themselves to have musical children. And I always say, I think the key thing is love of music has to be in that household somewhere. And I don't think that you have to be a professional musician to have children interested in music. And I think that you if you love music, and it doesn't really even matter what type of music it is, if you love music and you fill your home with music, I think it's pretty obvious that children will veer towards it and think it's something worthwhile. I think that's the really key thing. I mean, my parents weren't professional musicians or anything, but they loved music, and I grew up in a home, that had a lot of music, and I like to think that Daisy and her sister grew up in a home. My wife, Daisy's mum, is a musician herself and was trained in music and a player and everything. And I would like to think the thing that she and her sister got was that music was a big thing at all times of the day and night. And it didn't really matter what it was. It was something that was valued.
Yeah.
That's definitely true. And in fact, I've always found it interesting with childhood memories that all the sort of key memorable moments I have from childhood always seem to evolve around music, even if it wasn't like the prominent thing. Like when I think about Christmas, it's about the songs we always had on in the background, even if it wasn't what we were actually doing specifically at that moment.
Yeah. And Celi, music was a huge part of your kids' upbringing as well. Was that a conscious thing, or we must have music, like Howard said, there must be music in the house, or was it just natural, do you think?
I was going to ask the same exact thing. I was thinking, as a researcher, so much about what the benefits of singing are. So I wonder whether but also singing just comes so naturally to moms.
I always think that's such an interesting one, because every culture around the world, mothers sing to their babies. It's such an innate activity. And actually, one of the things that we see anthropologically is that there are theories that singing actually evolved partly with the role of improving mother-infant bonding. So actually playing a really fundamental role in the early support that mothers can provide to their infants. It's a shame sometimes, because I think that people can become much more self-conscious about their voices nowadays and perhaps not sing as much before they have children. So it might feel something that's a little bit more alien to them, or they're not as comfortable doing. But you just see when you do sing to a child, it's much easier for them to understand the melodic arches of singing compared to the more monotonous way that we tend to speak as adults. So it's such a simple thing to build that connection.
That's such an interesting thing, because this idea of people being inhibited to sing. Baz and Celi, you'll both remember when Sing Up decided that you had to start even earlier than primary school and get into Sure Start centres and actually help mothers sing to their babies and I wonder also if we live in a time where recorded music is so readily available that people slightly lose their own confidence. If you can have Beyonce singing a song, why should I sing it?
Yeah, that's a great point. So many moms now put on sort of, also you see like YouTube, or, like there's like a track of kids songs on Spotify. But it is great that I do think this Sure Start thing, they do, from my memory of having kids about 10 years ago, I remember they were really sort of insistent upon putting getting moms in a circle to sing nursery rhymes together. And it's so beneficial for the kids. You can just see it.
It's actually something we've done quite a lot of research on in my group over the last 10 years. I mean, unfortunately, since you had your kids, the Sure Start situation has taken a very dire downward trend. But we actually been working quite a bit on postnatal depression over the years, which can affect about 13% of women. So it's a lot of women every year who are going through it when they've had babies. And it's a really difficult condition to treat, because many mothers don't even realise that what they're experiencing is symptoms of postnatal depression beyond the usual fatigue and that you already have with a baby. And it's not easy to treat. Often if you're breastfeeding, you might not be confident about taking medication, and no mothers really have the time for psychological therapies. So we actually have run a series of randomized control trials saying, well, an innate activity that mothers have done across history, across culture, is singing to their babies. And we know the enormous benefits this has for people's own emotions when they sing, but also for the mother-infant bond. And that's so important within postnatal depression, because mothers experiencing symptoms often find it harder to bond with their babies, or challenges bonding can sort of be a precursor to developing symptoms. So we've run these studies where we've worked with fantastic musicians, including from the Royal College of Music and from a brilliant organisation called Breathe Arts Health Research. And they've been running 10-week programmes of singing in the community, often in children's centres, for mothers with postnatal depression. And the results have been amazing. Reductions of about 40% in symptoms within the first 6 weeks. Mothers actually experiencing better results even 6 months later compared to control groups. And also this not just being what we're seeing symptomatically with them, but also the way they're interacting with their babies. And this has shown but a biological level as well, like reductions in stress hormones that can be one of the factors that can exacerbate postnatal depression. So a really exciting finding from such a simple activity.
Yeah.
Just kind of taking a step back from that, because you'd mentioned about, singing in communities going back to the earliest origins of man, really. I wonder, what does it feel like to you now? If you were to look inside a community in the UK, would you see that there is a strong role of singing, or is it patchier than that, would you say?
Can I just, one thing I'd come in on this thought is the elephant in the room, of course, is COVID and what that did to people's engagement in all sorts of activities, not just musical ones. But it had a huge effect. I know this as a composer of choral music, in touch with choirs all around the world during the lockdown. It had an enormous effect, a bad effect, really, mostly on choirs who couldn't meet. But there's a strange paradox about the experience as well. And I don't know if Daisy found this in her research during COVID, which is that after COVID, a lot of choirs had been depleted in numbers, and choral societies and community choirs and groups had been very badly depleted because people didn't really want to carry on, on online sessions and all that kind of stuff. They found it a bit depressing sometimes, even though there was a very good intention about the online sessions, which was to keep the social cohesion of the group together when they couldn't meet. So there were very good intentions, but lots of people dropped off the list. And choirs spent the year or so after the lockdowns trying to re-recruit and get people back in. But one of the paradoxes of it was that there was a good side to it, which is that they realized how important it was to them, the participants. They'd gone to their community choir or their choral group or whatever it was, week on, week out, because they'd become a habit and part of their lives, which was a wonderful thing, but had sort of taken for granted what its effect might be on them. They just did it. And they kind of assumed it was a nice thing. And some people loved it, and some people thought it was just a nice way of spending an evening and meeting people, etc. But what I have definitely found from choirs and choral groups all around the world, in fact, is that they have a renewed and refreshed sense of the value of what they're doing, because they couldn't have it. If you take something away for a year or 2 years, there's no better way of showing someone what they're missing. And I wonder if that's reflected now in the way that groups are reforming around communities around the country. I mean, I would hazard to guess, but this is entirely anecdotal in terms of what I've heard, that actually there are possibly even more community choirs now than there were before the lockdown. Now, as I say, I don't have the statistics on that, and Daisy will have much more information on that generally around the country. But I get a sense that people are doing it with perhaps a little bit more determination than they did before.
Daisy, I'll come to you in a second, but I just want to share the fact that I so clearly remember coming back from COVID and singing, not just singing in a choir for the first time, but singing harmony. There was something incredibly powerful about revisiting that experience of singing alongside someone else who's singing something slightly different. And it was something really kind of genuinely quite magical. And I think you're right, Howard, that there has been, in some cases, a slow initial uptake, and now it does seem very vibrant. Obviously, Daisy, you've done a lot of stuff around the actual effects of COVID, but in relation to singing, do you have some observations?
I think something that I found very interesting was this virtual choir phenomenon during COVID. Yeah. I'd actually written a paper on virtual choirs versus real choirs and how they affected people differently about a year before COVID. And I think it was just this weird, quirky paper no one had ever read. And then suddenly, in the first few months of the pandemic, it was getting tens of thousands of reads, presumably from choir leaders all around the country. But one of the things we'd found was that if you do sing as part of a virtual choir or online in a choir, you do actually still experience a lot of the same emotion regulation benefits. So, helping you to perhaps discharge any negative emotions you might feel, or to feel more mindful. And it still was helping people with their emotions. But there was a big caveat here, which is that people really varied in how socially present they felt in the choir. For some people, they could still feel like they were in a group and it was having a social effect, whereas other people, it was just not at all. And that really moderated the success of how it was affecting people emotionally. And I think that's why we see some people who did continue doing virtual choirs during the pandemic and others for whom it was more of a short-lived phenomenon because they just couldn't get into it. And I don't have the answer to this, but I'd be very interested to know how people's tech setup affected that, because you can imagine that even the slightest delay in your internet bandwidth and speed and things would have a really disastrous effect on you feeling like you were able to keep in time and hear what was going on. So I'm not really surprised that the real deal has actually been what people wanted to return to after the pandemic. But I'm afraid I haven't quite got the stats yet on whether there is actually a difference in choir levels. But there actually are some data coming out soon that should allow us to look at this and be very interesting to see.
Just a few weeks ago, we had a really interesting conversation with Meryl Vandernoop that runs the Long COVID Kids Choir and the Long COVID Choir, which obviously are online because of, the people are, some of them are bedbound and really unwell. And it was really interesting that she did say there's, that they had a lot of benefits in their breathing and how they were feeling from doing the choir.
Let's deal with this kind of thorny issue now then of the position that young people seem to be in terms of their mental health. We were aware, obviously, before COVID of certain issues around contemporary society and young people's mental health and well-being, but it just felt like COVID just created this kind of perfect storm because now we're in a world where there's a lack of funding as well. There's some issues around physical health, the legacy of COVID, there's political interference or whatever you want to call it, challenges on the curriculum, overburdened mental health services. In all of this, is singing only ever going to be some kind of sticking plaster or a kind of a nice to have, or has it got more potential than that to be part of the full recovery from COVID?
I mean, I think it's got a lot more potential than that. I mean, you're right. We're facing a really difficult situation. It's about 1 in 5 younger teenagers, 1 in 4 older teenagers who now have a probable mental disorder. So this is a major health challenge, societal challenge, that, as you say, was exacerbated by the pandemic. I think that there is a role for singing and for the arts more generally in 2 places here. I think one of these is in prevention. So thinking about how we're using the arts amongst young people to support things like emotion regulation, which is such a simple but such an important thing, supporting social bonding, self-esteem. But I also think it's really important to consider the arts when a child is experiencing some problems. We're actually doing a lot of research within my group at the moment, looking at child and adolescent mental health services. And as you mentioned, there are these really long waiting lists. Some young people can be given waiting lists of months or even years, which is a complete disaster. We're actually experimenting by taking young people when they get onto the waiting list and saying, well, would you like to go through social prescribing? So being referred to community activities, whether it's choirs or other activities. Now, naturally, not a choir is not going to suit every young person, but we're actually hearing, our full results are back next year, but we're already hearing from many of the children the importance of having these activities whilst they're on that waiting list. A lot of them actually can tackle some of the same mechanisms that do get tackled in psychological therapies, and things like helping young people to be mindful, giving them a structure and a purpose, helping them to learn other social behaviours from their peers. But they can also provide something while someone's waiting. So there's not the sort of same deterioration necessarily in symptoms or the feeling that you're just being forgotten and left on that list. And I think that's a really underexplored area for the arts, but one that could be so important.
I think that's spot on, Daisy. I think that, one of the things that seems to have happened, and it's important not to generalize too much about 25,000 schools, but because they're all a bit different and they all do different things. But I think one of the things that seems to have happened, especially since the kind of Michael Gove era, is that schools are no longer seen as a place where lots of activities take place and where lots of different things overlap with each other, activities of all kinds, as an organism of human beings interacting, but seen as kind of machines to get people through 5 subjects because of an obsession with how well those 5 subjects were being taught in South Korea or Singapore. Which is where it all came from. It's this idea that we were somehow lagging behind our competitors in the world because we were not concentrating too much enough on maths or whatever it was. And whilst no one, I think, would would not want schools to aim for high standards and get good exam results and all the rest of it, because that serves those children well. The fact is that anybody who was in school before this period will remember school as a sort of hodgepodge of activities, some of which you did very well and loved, some of which you didn't do very well, but you still enjoyed doing, and some activities that you might not have chosen to do if it meant joining a club and finding time in your spare time at the weekend. But because they were offered at the school, you just did, or you got roped in because a friend wanted to, or whatever it was. And people find themselves in a school environment doing things they didn't perhaps expect they'd be doing when they came in at one end. And I think reducing schools to places that are just about the essential subjects is denying children a huge amount of their growing up. And it's not to say that you should offer absolutely everything in any school. That wouldn't be possible even if it was desirable. But the sense of a rounded offer seems to have been worn down over the last 15 years. And it's just hard to escape the fact that there are lots of children out there who might have taken to singing, who might have taken to drama, who might have taken to being in an orchestra, who might have started a band, had there been the sort of offer that those things could be supported and things they could do in their time at school and do it. And it's all these things are social as well as musical. You know, we did a survey back in the Music Manifesto days prior to Sing Up existing for the then government, and asked lots of children who were doing music in schools across the country what they enjoyed about it and what they didn't enjoy about it and what they got out of it. And hundreds of interviews were done. And what was interesting about it was that for pretty much, I would say 90% of the children, whatever it was they were doing, playing in the school band, in the orchestra, singing in a choir, being in a musical, whatever it was, the social side of it was incredibly important. And that I kept saying to people who said, well, not everybody wants to learn the clarinet. Well, the thing is that children often don't know at the beginning what it is they want to do. And then they find themselves playing a clarinet in a band with other people. And it's the thing of doing it with another person that makes them enjoy it, rather than the being in a room with another teacher, with the teacher, and just learning the instrument. That's one thing. But actually participating with other young people is such an incredibly important part of why they carried on doing it, because no one was forcing them to do it after the first year or so. And they were doing it because they had enjoyed the social event of playing something. And they nearly always, when you said to them, what was your favorite piece? There would nearly always be some piece that they had played in their own band, often by composers you'd never even heard of, but where the head of music had chosen this piece and they decided to do it, and they did it and they liked it. And I think there's something about that things being on offer, not compulsory, just there if you want to do it, that can be a great joy and a solace for children going through school. And there are some things that a music department can often be a place, for example, where children go and cluster and find their space in a way that's a kind of a little sanctuary. Perhaps they're not enjoying other aspects of school or some aspects of the things they're being taught. And in my experience, music departments have this kind of little shelter feel to them. And that's not to say that art departments don't do the same, and drama departments, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea that schools should be able to offer all those places and those different ways of getting through teenagehood seems to be something that's been worn down a bit. And one thing we could practically do is encourage schools to reopen that sense of generosity in what they're offering.
I get the feeling there's the appetite amongst the parents as well. I mean, we've been looking around our local primary schools because my eldest daughter's just at that application stage. And it's amazing how often when you're looking around, parents are saying, well, they're asking about the extracurricular things. You know, have you got forest school, which is the big craze at the moment to get the kids outdoors more? And they're asking about choirs. In fact, my daughter's at preschool, and anyone can get a space at breakfast club in the mornings. But the fight that's going on to get the kids into the Monday morning choir, we're on the longest waiting list ever because everyone's desperate for their kids to have these opportunities. So I think this is a really interesting kind of barometer coming through about, the parents aren't asking what the results are in maths. They're asking about these extra experiences that they recognise as so important for their kids.
Isn't it partly the change in our culture, which is going on all over the world in all countries, which is that the way we we learn things is changing dramatically, and the way we organize our communities is changing dramatically because of the whole online world that is now a part of our existence, and that we're probably not going to go back to the way things were a long time ago, that we are kind of learning on our feet. And I wonder if people in an age where social media is both brings many benefits but also does a lot of damage, young people know it's doing them damage and yet they're still on it because they feel they should be. Well, perhaps putting back into the menu of the things they do, things that are kind of the opposite of social media, which is it's collective in a supportive way, maybe something that's become more important than perhaps it was in 1950, say, where everything a child did was communal.
Yeah. I was reminded by this conversation about some research I remember Daisy talking about around the protective nature of engaging in the arts and culture, and how that sort of the level of engagement then directly correlates to like the impact on well-being, and that active participation was a really important part of that.
We've done a lot of research taking what's called an epidemiology approach, so using very big data sets that track people over years or decades of their lives. And we've been looking at how people's music and arts engagement relates to these longer term outcomes. And it's absolutely fascinating. Like, we do see that younger people who engage in the arts in primary school actually tend to have better behavioural regulation as adolescents. And we also see that there are these long-term associations with mental health outcomes as well.
Yeah.
I mean, naturally, we have to be really cautious here because there are lots of confounders, things that will affect who engages in the arts and what their outcomes are. I mean, statistically, the types of models we build are really sophisticated and they take account of these factors. So we do find these relationships independent of these, which I think is really exciting here. But it also gives us a pointer that sometimes these sort of background behaviours that we're doing throughout our lives, you know, even not thinking necessarily about interventions or like activities you're being prescribed or anything like that, but the sort of creativity that we might be embedding in our day-to-day lives can be having these effects, just like other health behaviours like physical activity, for example.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. We've had a lot of conversations with guests who work, particularly when it's in the world of mental health and perhaps more profound mental health needs, who work a lot in the world of either individual or small group. And we've been thinking about, you know, what does that look like in a school or a multi-academy trust? How do you configure that when what you might be tackling with those young people is something quite profound, potentially triggering, but also potentially very transformative. But I wonder whether there's something there, certainly in what both of you have said about remembering the value of the more communal approach to singing as well. And I wonder, is there something about that kind of where singing is normalized in a school, for example, that things feel different, or that could sit alongside more kind of focused one-to-one work? What do you think?
Inherently, I like the sound of that. I think the thing we always have to be really careful about is what we're attributing to singing. And I think sometimes the challenge has been people attributing things to the arts that actually aren't as scientific, and then that unraveling the argument for actually the things where there is a really good evidence base. And one of the areas that, when we're thinking about schools, that has become like just a really dangerous territory is suggesting that arts in schools is going to be improving academic attainment outcomes, because much as we'd all love to believe that story, it just isn't borne out by the data. The studies that sort of suggested this a few decades ago tended to be correlational, looking, you know, cross-sectionally in the same year, or they were absolutely fraught with challenges methodologically in the way they'd been conducted. And it's mainly based on this concept of near versus far transfer effects in the brain. If you do activities, then cognitively they can strengthen very similar type activities in the brain, but they just can't affect things that are really different. So doing singing and music will improve things like your auditory awareness. It might even improve things like your understanding linguistically of things, maybe even your pronunciation in your language or other languages, so sort of phonological aspects, but it is not going to affect your maths score. If you find someone who is brilliant at music and maths, that is not a causal relationship between the two. So I think within schools, I think where we have a much stronger argument is around the mental health, and potentially as well around the sort of social cohesion and the social support and bonding that these groups bring. But I think it's good to be very clear also about, accepting they're not going to be tackling some of the really big challenges that schools are facing, or necessarily getting, kids the grades that they want or improving their IQs. And perhaps celebrating the arts for the bits they do, and also for their own inherent value, not arguing that you only need them because they're going to tick off these particular criteria that a school is trying to meet and targets, but inherently recognizing that engaging in arts can also just be valuable for its own sake, and also because it makes you keep engaging as you get older if you've done it early in life.
Inspiring Voices Interlude.
We all know that singing brings people together, but on Sing Up Day we can unite the entire world. Sing Up Day is back, and the 18th of June marks the 15th anniversary of our global singing celebration, and you're invited. This year's empowering anthem, In Me I Trust, is all about self-belief, trusting in ourselves, and tapping into our inner strength. Have a listen.
In me I trust that I'm enough. I will not hide my sense of pride. I know I'm loved, I'm lifted up. So I'll choose this day to celebrate. Now switch it up.
Whether you're a school, community group, choir, or just friends who love to sing, Sing Up Day is for everyone. Register for free as a Sing Up friend, and you'll instantly get everything you'll need. All the song's audio tracks, lyrics, interactive whiteboard and score, teaching materials and activities including an assembly plan. Plus, this year, we've also got a special songwriting project and a rap writing activity written by Rap Club founder and previous Inspiring Voices guest, Ben Turner. Don't forget to put your group on the map. Literally, add your celebration to our interactive Sing Up Day map and send in your performance of In Me I Trust to shine in our worldwide DigiChoir video. Join in with thousands of singers for our global singing celebration. Jump on over to singup.org/singupday to grab your resources now.
Sing it.
Sing Up Day, the 18th of June. Add your voice to our global chorus and celebrate the power of singing.
On with the show.
We, as a nation, or nations, here in the UK, have often forgotten the fact that amongst the developed nations, we were the first country, in a sense, to lead with the idea that singing was something you would put in a school for its own value. When tonic solfa was invented, it was invented for poor children to do, and it was invented so that you could do music in any environment, even if you didn't have a piano and you didn't have a music teacher. That was kind of the point of it. And it was a way of getting round the huge hurdles of a lot of things you have to learn to do music. It was a sort of simplified version, and it started in ordinary schools in the countryside in particular, and spread from there as a system that could be quickly brought to bear. But no one was ever saying, oh, well, this is going to make everything else at the school work better. They just thought it was something worth having in a school environment. And we've always had this idea that these things can take place in school because they are desirable in their own right. And this is why I say I think over the last 15 years, a rather dangerous idea has crept in, which is that you could just separate off all these things and not make it part of the overall tapestry of a child's time in school. And I think, as a music sector, we've wanted to protect ourselves and make our case to government and funders and the Treasury over the years. On the one hand, as an industry, we say, we earn the country a lot of money, therefore support what we do in schools. On the other hand, we say, to support singing and endeavours or musical endeavours, we say that the music services and the things that are offered to school are something that can help a whole school environment in various different ways. We've made those points because we know that we worry that the people were making these points to don't think that they are worth it in their own sense, that it's a kind of a plug-in, an extra. But then a lot of the people who make these decisions about school funding send their children to schools, fee-paying schools, where it would be unheard of not to offer music and drama and sport and other activities. Unheard of. No one would pay 40 grand a year or 50 or 60 grand a year to not have music in a school they send their children to. Impossible to imagine. We're probably in the longer term moving towards a very different form of education system generally. Can you imagine that the current way classes and makeup of schools, can you imagine it's going to be the same in 25 years' time? I don't. I feel as if huge
changes. If it is, we're going to be in trouble.
I feel as if huge changes are on the way. I don't know from what country we will learn how to make this transition. Probably Finland, but who knows?
I think one of the things as well about music and arts in schools is that we've looked at what factors predict a child's engagement in the arts. And outside of schools, as you might expect, there is a really strong social gradient. So people are much more likely to engage in the arts if their parents have engaged, if their parents are well educated, if they've got higher household incomes, all of these different socioeconomic factors. But in schools, it's actually much more of a level playing field. Like, you know, if we've been looking at data from a decade or so ago, but when we've done that, we found that, you know, because it's a universal offering, you didn't actually have that gradient. You know, if music was offered in schools, because every child goes to school, it was a great way of reaching everybody. And this is really important because children who engage in the arts are much more likely to engage as adults. So getting that behavioural pattern in at a really early age is so important. If we were trying to think, how can we help young people engage in the arts? Any kind of intervention outside the school setting does run the risk of increasing that social gradient. You know, more middle-class families thinking, oh, great, more arts provision, let's jump on it. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but the challenge is, how do you reach the kids who wouldn't already be engaging, who might be facing more barriers to access? And schools is that perfect universal offering opportunity. So I think it's such a great window that I hope starts to be appreciated more.
Yeah,
I mean, there are things coming out. I mean, I know I've been saying we shouldn't just reduce the arts to the value of what they do, but you know, as my dad was saying, like, it's really important to also acknowledge the value that they do have. And we've been working quite a bit with government recently, actually calculating what the health economic impact of engagement in the arts is. I can't say the full details because the report's due out over the next few weeks, but it's really positive, and it's really great to have these results actually showing that if you invest in the arts, not only do you get certain health outcomes, but you actually get the health economic outcomes. And when we're thinking about ways of saving money, more preventative approaches to healthcare, particularly with mental health care, this feels like a clear win.
I was also thinking about the thing that you were saying, Howard, about kind of the future. What is the future going to bring for us? And, you know, there's so much conversation about what are we going to need from kids' brains in the future, from adults' brains in the future? Like, they need to be problem solvers. They need to be able to think creatively. And there's so much around what the arts can bring to create creative young people that look at things differently, that are able to problem solve, that are able to adapt.
I think, you know, often life goes in a direction you can't predict, and whatever predictions one makes probably turn out to be wrong. But I think it does seem true that in a world, I mean, the arts are very, very sensitive and vulnerable to the down and upsides of the coming AI revolution, the existing AI revolution, I should probably say. I can see it in my own industry of music that it will probably cause enormous damage, but there will also be benefits. You know, it's not a simple black and white issue. However, we have to be resilient to these changes that are coming our way. In previous generations, you know, the Industrial Revolution, they had about 50 or 60 years to get used to it. You know, even the electronic revolution, as electricity became available at the end of the 19th century, it took about 50 years before it really spread through society and people worked out what would be different. And in that period, lots of things lived side by side. You know, the combustion engine existed alongside horse-drawn carriages in the same street as a bus being driven by some kind of diesel power and a car being driven by an internal combustion petrol engine. These things coexist for a while, but they used to have decades and decades to get used to it. And we're now being faced with changes that are taking place in years, not decades. And the speed of change is bewildering. And this is why I just think that we probably need to be battening down to make people resilient rather than necessarily predicting what exactly is going to happen. But, one of the things that happens is that we confuse, say, the activity of music at school, or as a young person in your free time even. We confuse this with the idea that you're going to become a professional musician. But the fact is that most of the children who in any school do music or singing will not do music as a profession. They will have it by their side through their 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years after that. And, long lives are going to have to be filled with something other than, 30 years in one job, which is not going to be a thing anymore. People already are not doing the same jobs for 40 years. It's just not a thing anymore. So the speed of change is coming, and giving people an innate interest in and curiosity and love of collective musical activity. It's just one of many things we could be talking about. Art, drama, all of these things would count. But giving them that early on, as Daisy says, they're more likely to carry that through. And there's a long stretch to go, and lots of changes will take place. Some of the things that we learned in lockdown are already part of our lives now. And, some of it were positive, and we adapted like human beings do. But we also were aware of enormous issues that were thrown up in our faces, like the enormous issue of loneliness and its tremendously bad effect on people's health and their longevity and their ability to enjoy life at all. And lockdown really threw that up in our faces. And I'm not sure how much as a society we've taken on board what we learnt about that.
Yeah. Daisy, I wanted to ask just a bit about your research into intersectionality, because we've been looking a lot at some of the life affecting conditions that young people have, whether that's around disability or being in care or being hospitalized or whatever. And you've found some work where the intersectionality, particularly where in terms of neurodiversity, I think, can throw up even more kind of profound problems, but there might be some opportunities around creativity and maybe music making in addressing that.
I've been really lucky over the years. I've met some amazing organizations who are delivering like these fantastic programs for young people. One of the ones that I've seen is lots of organizations doing work with young people who have autistic spectrum disorder, and seeing the amazing ways that some children can respond to music and that families can use this as a way of supporting social interactions. I visited one school where they were even using music to give a kind of auditory schedule to the day, having certain sounds that were indicating what the next part of the day was going to entail to help increase the predictability of the environment for the young people. So I think there's some really exciting work going on in this space. I think it's always really nice as well when we're thinking about medical conditions or other health conditions or neurodiversity, whatever, across the broad spectrum of health, thinking that these are conditions, all health conditions have got psychological aspects to them as well as the core medical, whether that's just coping with the condition or whether it's the mental health aspect associated or whether it's inherent parts of the condition itself. And I think we have a health system that's still very much built on a biomedical model of treating the core medical problem. But I think we are increasingly realizing the value of looking holistically at people's illnesses, but also their health generally, and thinking, not just what's the matter, but what matters to you, and identifying opportunities there to use the arts to address those broader challenges people might be facing.
Daisy, how receptive do you think doctors who've come up through the biomedical route of their long training are to the idea of a slightly different definition of how to tackle these issues?
I mean, in my experience, extremely receptive. I have doctors within my research group. We collaborate a lot with clinicians. I think it's always about making sure that we're very clear about what the arts can do and what they can't do, being very evidence-based, acknowledging the realm that the arts can support in, not trying to overstep into areas where actually there are clinical treatments and therapies that can play that role, but trying to work in partnership to see where the gaps are and the opportunities are that music and the arts can have that role. But I do think that increasingly doctors and the new generation of doctors coming through as well are recognizing that holistic need within care.
You mentioned the phrase "what matters to you," and I think that's a big phrase in and around social prescribing, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Do you see, particularly for children and young people, do you see social prescribing taking greater prominence over the coming years?
I mean, social prescribing is really a mechanism of care. So it's a term that's being bandied around a lot to mean an enormous umbrella of things. And I think this is causing some challenges, because when we see it in the media and things, people can be saying, oh, social prescribing doesn't work. Well, it's extremely hard to tell if social prescribing works. It's a bit like saying drugs work or drugs don't work. Well, it's like which drug for which person with which outcome that you're trying to achieve. And it's the same with social prescribing. The whole concept there is just referring people to non-medical sources of support. And that can be anything from referring someone for a bus pass or benefits or job seeking advice through to an arts and cultural activity. And that might be a one-off session or a 12-month program. So these are vastly different things that we're using for this one term. I do think that the concept of these non-medical supports alongside core medical pathways is absolutely the future and will be taken further. But I mean, in an ideal route, we wouldn't, if we think about like arts on prescription specifically, ideally, we wouldn't need this because we'd have so many arts in our societies and our communities, we'd have broken down barriers to access that people wouldn't need to be referred to them. But I think, the situation we're currently in where there are these barriers, there is this gradient in people, whether or not people are likely to engage. There's a postcode lottery about what opportunities you even have around you. I do think there is a need and a value to having a way of saying to people when they're approaching doctors with health problems, there could be other avenues that you could be considering instead of or alongside your other care that include things like the arts. I think we need to be careful about not reducing it just to doctors as being the prescribers, particularly for young people. Most young people actually don't go to their GPs about mental health problems. And the work that we're doing, we're actually approaching children and young people in mental health services or even in schools and thinking about primary prevention opportunities, saying in schools which children are looking at risk of loneliness or mental health problems is now a good chance to engage them more with other activities like the arts. And I think we need to, so not trying to overly medicalize that referral, but think across someone's life, what are all the different ways we could approach them and help them to engage more?
Yes, I'm thinking about the number of people in things like kind of clinical commissioning groups who talk a lot about outcomes and impact, and are maybe trying, is there still that kind of square peg thing going on where we're trying to articulate the impact, but it's so much more complex than that. Do you feel like we're kind of getting over that a bit better now?
I think it varies. I mean, we have some fantastic studies, randomized controlled trials of referring people to arts activities as arts on prescription, social prescribing, and seeing very tangible benefits from it. I've been working on a clinical trial in Greece where we've actually just had some fantastic results of this. This time looking more at other adults rather than necessarily just young people. But we've also been taking more novel approaches with the way we've been doing that research in my group. We've been looking at electronic patient records that are being captured not just by GPs, but also from other sources like through social care, through charity-based social prescribing referrals. And one of the fascinating things we're seeing actually is it's the non-medical referrals, like through social care, through education, through charities and communities, that are actually most successful in reaching the people who wouldn't normally engage and who are perhaps facing greater socioeconomic burden or multimorbidity, like more health conditions in their lives. And I think this is a really important learning of, like I was saying before, about not overly medicalizing it, but trying to find other routes to reach people. But in those areas, there is some really good evidence coming out, including, the tight sort of gold standard randomized control trials that clinicians and commissioners often want to see as well.
So I suppose it brings us kind of to a degree back to where we started, which is that is there something particular about singing? We've talked a lot about music in schools, about sort of arts and creativity in general. But I'm thinking particularly from the point of view of maybe, a teacher or someone involved in planning school life, do you have any kind of particular advice of why it's worth engaging with singing as something which is part of the tapestry? I think that was the word you used, Howard. Why it has such particular value?
Well, I'm sure Daisy's got things to say about this, but my feeling here would be that, first of all, pragmatically speaking, it's easy to start because everybody can sing. And, one of the great myths is that people can't sing. Is children all start off being able to sing. It takes them longer in different varying degrees to get to all the components of singing with the rhythm and the melody and the words and all that kind of stuff. Some of them develop at different rates. And it takes them, some people longer and some people shorter, it doesn't matter. But in the end, everybody gets there. It's something that you can start with everybody. And not everybody enjoys it. You can't pretend that they do. Not everybody enjoys reading books, but there are lots of different types of books that you can read. And you might find a different type of book, a graphic novel that you prefer to any book full of words. Well, that the same should apply really to music and singing. One of the things I would say is that we have a slight issue with our projection and promotion of the arts, in as much as it's two things, isn't it? There's the elite arts of famous people doing amazing things and actors that you love doing something in an amazing drama on TV, or singers that are fabulous, whether it's Celine Dion up the Eiffel Tower or, Ariana Grande at a concert for 10,000 people. We admire that, and it is inspiring to us to see elite and brilliant, extraordinary people do what they do. And to go to the National Theatre and see theatre kind of at its finest. All of these things at this great level is what we think of as the arts, and that a lot of the money that's spent on the arts goes into that. And that enhances our civilization. It makes our country a better place to live in, any country for that matter, and all the rest of it. And it's an inspiration, but it is a kind of a pyramid, and it's about individual success a lot of the time. And one of the things we've been through over the last 25 years or so is a great rash of talent shows on TV, where it's all about the individual stepping across a threshold from being an ordinary person and becoming a megastar the next minute, because luck has shone upon them a great ray of light, and forgotten about all their early training and everything, and it just magically happens that they become incredibly successful and famous, and all that follows from that. The trouble is that is a slight confusion as to what the arts is all the rest of the time. And I long to see a country which is absolutely full of the arts, but it's not that. It's all the other stuff that the arts can do. Yeah. It's a collective endeavor. It's a wonderful marketplace of human endeavor and aspiration and hope and fears and all the rest of it. And spaces where that can take place and where it's something that is applauded and thought of as worthwhile. I mean, if you go to any of these towns that have had a big festival, whether it's a city of culture type of a thing, or, some big arts festival has taken place as a one-off, the thing that spreads through the pride and the civic enjoyment and the sense of the space looking better and sounding better and people feeling better is really palpable. And that's something that's happened to a whole community, like a wave. And that wave of arts is what I think Daisy's work reveals. And I think it's what I most am passionate about, even though, like everybody else, I love to see fantastic performers do their thing and great writers do their thing. The fact of the matter is they are part of a great community of artists. And we could have a great community of artists doing all of this activity for people in their own homes and in their own streets and communities on a much greater scale, which would be both, lovely for the people doing it, participating, but also lovely for the people for whom that's their life and that's their job. And that's where these other functions that may be associated with it, get social prescribing, dealing with loneliness, whatever the long list is that's where they're likely to find it and be helped by it. We need to project the arts as the whole family of what the arts do, rather than endlessly resort to the idea that individual success is what we're going for, the genius myth and all that. Because the arts is, in fact, an incredibly collaborative endeavor. Everybody who does anything worthwhile in the arts has done it with a group of people. whoever they are, even if one of them is very famous and the rest aren't, the truth of the matter is it's always a group endeavor. And that aspect of it, I feel we don't sell, as it were, well enough.
And that, folks, is why Howard was the National Singing Ambassador. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Daisy, what are your thoughts?
I'm not really sure there's much point me following such an impression and rousing speech, but basically everything Howard said.
Yeah. A phrase that we come across all the time, Celi and me, when we're talking about this, is about the normalizing of singing. And if only we could get that as a thing right from birth all the way through, we'll be getting somewhere.
And isn't it a strange and odd and lovely thing that you can be an average singer and be in a first-class choir, but you can't be an average singer and be a world singing star? It's just not going to happen. But you can be, and you can be just an okay singer and you can be in an amazing choir, and that's a fantastic feeling. It's like flying.
Yeah.
And you can be just an okay singer and just totally love singing a song with your kids or your friends or in the car.
I'm going to draw things to a close by asking you something which we've asked of all our guests, which is to see if you can identify a particularly inspiring singing or vocal moment, either your own experience of it or something that you've observed from someone else.
My youngest daughter was actually born a bit too early. And shortly after she was born, she contracted meningitis. So we had a nightmarish time in intensive care with her. And the thing that I found the hardest was not knowing if she was going to make it and not being allowed to touch her in that time. But the one thing that I could do was to sing. So whenever I was allowed into her isolation room, I would stand the other side of the room in all of my PPE and I would sing to her. And it was near Christmas. And so I sang carols. And so it's definitely not ranking as one of the happy moments in my life. But for me, that was the most poignant musical experience I've ever had. And I'm so grateful that I had singing in that time as that way of having a bond with her. And fortunately, she is absolutely fine now. It's always given me a very different view of Christmas carols since, but it was a really special singing moment.
Well, I'm the one who now says I can't follow that.
Yeah.
And as a distant participant in that period, I absolutely wholeheartedly confirm the power of that moment for Daisy. Well, I'm going to do a more flippant example, which was during lockdown. Daisy will remember that when she was young, we used to, on Christmas Eve, have carols in one of the rooms in our house, and some friends would come around, there'd be food and drink, and then we would bash our way through some carols, which was a lovely thing to do each year. And then obviously this wasn't possible during lockdown. And the first Christmas in lockdown, don't know if you remember, but it was very, very wet and drizzly. And we decided that we couldn't do it indoors. I drag an electric piano out outside the house onto the street. And we would do it, but we would just do it for anybody in the street who wanted to join in and who could be distanced from us at 20 feet in their groups. And we assumed about 20 people would turn up because it wasn't a very nice night. And it was absolutely amazing because the whole street was full of family groups about to enjoy Christmas, singing rough and ready carols with an electric piano gradually filling up with water in the rain. And it was just a lovely demonstration of the power of singing together and the basicness of it. And the fact that even if the piano had packed up, we could have carried on and people would have been willing to carry on. And I think that gets back to that first point, which is why start with children in a Sure Start Centre or in a primary school or a pre-primary school? Well, the reason to start is it's easy to start and it's natural and we can do it with each other. And I would defy anybody who's been in a situation where music making or singing has happened spontaneously in a place, whatever that place is, whether in a sense of joy or a sense of fear, where they have not felt it to be an amazing thing that they lived through. I think it's with us at these very high emotion points in our lives. One of the reasons I think there's so much music theatre is because we're trying to capture that sense that, in great moments in our existence, we resort to it. Whether we're people hiding in a bomb shelter singing to keep our spirits up, as we've seen films of Ukrainians doing in recent years. Why are they doing singing? Because they can, and they don't need don't need all the paraphernalia. You can just sit and the group can do it. And it does give you some sense of courage and togetherness. And it can also be a very joyful thing, spontaneous music making.
Howard, Daisy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Inspiring Voices. Reflections. We spend a lot of our time kind of looking at the here and now and how to fix the here and now. But there was some such interesting insights and things evolving that are going to change how all this looks in the future, aren't they?
It's amazing, the work that Daisy's doing, the research she's doing, and the research that people are doing all over the place is actually feeding into how the world is changing. I mean, really, that's the amazing thing.
Yeah. And, this, what she was talking about in terms of sort of medical models and this growing understanding of kind of like the whole picture of the individual and their needs, that here we are with, one of the most cited scientists in the world being one of the greatest advocates for the power of the arts, and with a really, detailed knowledge of music and singing and the role it plays. That's really exciting.
I also really think that thing about open access. I mean, I think that is the big kind of message, is that singing, that music should be able to be tapped into by everyone. And that, like Howard was saying, you don't have to be Ariana Grande, but like that, it's singing as a part of your life. It can be tapped into at sad times, at great times, on holidays, that it's just part of your existence. It's been part of our existence since the beginning of time. Yeah.
And I really liked that he mentioned the positive from COVID, which was that whole thing of actually when we realise what things we've missed and the value of them. And I suppose singing is one of those things. Sometimes, people are really aware of the benefit, but then other times, it takes that taking away to realise how much we need that kind of interaction and how good it is for us.
And also interesting, even Daisy, what she was saying, that like the parents around her that she sees are like, I want to know about the forest school. I want to know about the choir. I want to know about the other things that like we can get involved in. Because that's important for people.
Yeah. That's what creates rounded individuals, doesn't it?
Yeah. And what defines your life, right?
Yeah.
All the color is what defines your life.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Inspiring Voices. Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify.
Videos of each episode are also available on Sing Up Foundation YouTube channel. For more about us, and to access our library of resources or to donate to support our work, please visit www.singupfoundation.org.
Thanks to Becky Owen and The Refuge for our beautiful podcast music, specially arranged by Becky and adapted from her song Anemone.